They say the universe has a messed up sense of humor. You think you've hit rock bottom, and then your ex invites you to his wedding just to rub salt in the wound. That's how I knew life still had lessons to teach me, even if I didn't ask for them. I'm Aaliyah Brooks, and if you told me a few years ago that I'd end up standing on a stage at the wedding of the man who broke me, staring down a crowd that expected me to fold well, I'd have laughed in your face. But here we are, and let me back up a sec because the real story isn't about a wedding. It's about losing yourself, surviving the silence, and clawing your way back. I grew up in Southwest Atlanta, in a neighborhood where the train rumbled by at all hours and everybody knew your business. That place taught me how to be loud and proud. My mom always said I had God in my throat. Singing was my heartbeat, my way to breathe. My voice filled church halls, backyard barbecues, anywhere folks would listen. When I was 23, fresh out of college, I met Thomas Harden. He was older, a law student with that slick kind of confidence you get when the world's always told you yes. The first time he heard me sing, he stared at me like I was a puzzle he couldn't wait to solve. Back then, I thought that look meant love. The first years were honeyed, I won't lie. Thomas loved my music, or said he died, played the role, asked about my lyrics, took me to jazz bars, held my hand like he meant forever. I thought I'd found a partner who got me, flaws and all. But love, yeah, it's trickier than a song with a hidden key change. The cracks didn't show up all at once. They came quiet, like weeds sneaking up through a garden. When I got offered my dream touring with a jazz group, Thomas just smiled and said, "But you'll be gone so long, what about us?" That was the first time I chose him over my music, but it sure wasn't the last. The gigs disappeared, replaced by dinner parties and ironing his shirts before trial. I kept telling myself, just a little longer then I'll come back to my dreams. But you know what I mean, right? Time gets slippery, and suddenly, you wake up and don't recognize yourself. I stopped singing at home, in public, even in the shower. It's wild how quickly you can silence the best parts of yourself for someone else's comfort. Thomas's career soared, became a hotshot civil rights attorney, lauded for understanding the struggle while barely tolerating my own roots. At home, he flinched when my mama called, and one night he said, "If you want respect, maybe don't lead with your feelings." That cut deeper than I cared to admit. Soon, my world was beige, quiet, predictable. And when he left no warning, just a note on the kitchen table and an empty closet, I barely knew how to grieve. I became a ghost, tiptoeing through my own apartment, afraid even to play music in case it hurt too much. Kesha, my best friend since college, is a human hurricane. She refused to let me vanish. She'd bust into my place, open the blinds, bring food I barely touched. One day, she said, "You don't have to sing, but you also don't have to disappear." She told me about a teaching gig at the Community Arts Center, just one class with kids. I laughed at first, convinced I was done. But those words rattled around my head, and when I finally walked into that bright classroom, heart pounding, something shifted. The kids didn't care about my baggage, they just wanted to learn. One little girl asked, "Do you sing?" And I said, "Not as much as I used to." She shrugged and said, "Maybe you will again." Sometimes the simplest things hit hardest. Teaching got me out of bed, got me moving again. I started writing in my old notebook, nothing fancy, just scraps of melody and words I couldn't say out loud. Music found its way back, not to impress, but to heal. Then, out of nowhere, I got that invitation. You were cordially invited to the wedding of Thomas Everett Harden and Jessica Marie Walton. It was embossed, elegant, and sharp as a blade. My first thought was, this can't be real. Kesha read it and said, "They want you to show up and feel small. Don't give them that." But the truth? I was tired of feeling like a shadow in my own life. So I went. Not for Thomas, not for Jessica, but for the girl I'd lost along the way. I put on a gold dress, one that used to scare me, too bold, too loud, and walked into that southern vineyard like I owned the air I breathed. The reception was straight out of a magazine, flowers, lights, and polite smiles that felt like daggers. When Jessica came over, all icy sweetness, she said, "We'd be honored if you'd perform tonight." You could hear the control in her voice. She wanted to watch me squirm. Kesha squeezed my hand, whispered, "You owe them nothing." But I realized for the first time in years, I wanted to sing not for them, but for myself. The MC called my name. My knees shook, I'm not going to lie, but when I grabbed that mic, I felt something old and wild spark back to life. I sang a song I'd written during the hardest months about losing yourself, about clawing your way out of silence. My voice cracked. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. The whole courtyard went quiet. Even the cicadas seemed to hush. When I finished, there was this heavy silence. Then applause, real applause, not the polite kind. People stood up, some cried, and for a second, I felt every piece of myself come back together. Thomas found me afterward, eyes tired, and said, "I didn't know you could still sing like that." I looked at him, really looked, and realized I felt nothing but relief. "I never stopped." I said, "Not really." He apologized, awkward and sincere, but I knew then the story wasn't about him, or Jessica, or anyone but me. Jessica never came over, but I saw her watching. Something in her softened, maybe respect, maybe fear, I don't know. The funny thing is, it didn't matter. That night, a man named Michael Harris, turns out he runs a famous jazz club in Manhattan, offered me a set. No promises, no expectations, just a stage and my voice. For the first time in years, I said yes, without fear. A month later, I sang at the Blue Room, my old friends in the crowd, Kesha at my side. The city outside buzzed and blinked, but inside, the air felt sacred. I sang my truth not for applause, not for approval, but because I finally remembered who I was. The applause at the end was thunderous, but what really mattered was the quiet after, the sense that I'd finally come home to myself. Now, every morning, I look in the mirror and see a woman who isn't afraid to be too much, too loud, too real. My voice isn't for their approval, it's for my truth. The funny thing about surviving humiliation is that you come out the other side with nothing left to lose and everything left to sing for. So let me ask you, if you've ever lost your voice or felt like the world wanted you to shrink, what would it take for you to stand up and take it back? Do you think forgiveness is about the other person, or is it about freeing yourself? Drop your thoughts below, because this story isn't just mine, it's for anyone who's ever been silenced and decided, one day, to sing anyway.